presence, though there is, but officially there is. Area B, which includes the smaller Palestinian towns and villages, is under the civil control of the Palestinian Authority, but mixed security control of the IDF and the Palestinian police. And then Area C is under full control of the IDF, of the Israeli Defense Forces. There are no Jewish settlers under Palestinian control, under Oslo. Only Palestinian Arabs are under the control of the Palestinian Authority under Oslo. All of the Jewish settlers are in Area C, which is under Israeli control. There are also today about 200,000 Palestinians who are in Area C. So we need to take this into account as well. So this was created throughout the 1990s. The most complicated issue with the city of Hebron, because there's a Jewish community in the heart of the city of Hebron. So in Hebron there's no ABC. It has its own division into Jewish areas and Arab areas. Very complicated. You can go visit Hebron if you are in Israel, and you can actually see those divisions. So it's kind of a microcosm of the entire West Bank, and you can see in the city of Hebron. A final status agreement was supposed to be signed by 1999 under Oslo. Did not happen. Then in 2000, the two sides met in Camp David and tried to hash out a comprehensive peace agreement. There's no peace agreement yet, so they didn't reach anything. But in those negotiations, Israel came with a formula that a few months later would become part of the Clinton parameters. And what Israel basically suggested is that, again, if you look at, which map would be good, the Omer plan from 2007, it's the same logic that will be more specific, is that Israel would keep the main settlement clusters, would annex those territories, which in 2000 Israel claimed would be about 8 to 9%. Under Omer, it would be about 96% of the West Bank would be returned to the Palestinians, would be given to the Palestinians, and only 4% would be under Israeli control. And you can see those clusters on the map. So they either stretch connecting Israel, which is west of the West Bank, and the greater Jerusalem area. And one idea that was floated is that Israel would compensate the Palestinians with extra territory. It also means that all of the Gaza Strip would be under Palestinian control, which in fact will happen post-2005. So as you can see, Israel suggested that in return for those areas in white that Israel would keep and annex, the Palestinians would get extra territory in the southern part of the West Bank and in and around the Gaza Strip. So this was under these type of exchange, the overwhelming majority of the Jewish population in the West Bank and East Jerusalem would remain in place, would not be moved. About 50,000 Jewish settlers would have to be moved under this plan. And you can see all those triangles. They represent settlements that would not be part of the territory that the state of Israel had. So the overwhelming majority of the population, over 300,000, would live in those 4% territory of the West Bank, and the rest, the smaller settlements, would have to be dismantled or negotiated, or something would have to happen. By the way, the same logic was to be applied, to some degree, to the city of Jerusalem. So here we have this map. This is a projection of Omer's final status map. It's based on the Clinton parameters that were laid out in Taba in early 2001. And it basically says that in the municipal borders of Jerusalem, Israel would keep under its control all of the Jewish neighborhoods. They're called Jewish neighborhoods because Israel views East Jerusalem as part of Israel, was annexed. So all the Jewish neighborhoods would remain under Israeli control. All the Arab neighborhoods of East Jerusalem under this plan would be part of the Palestinian state. And very complicated issues over the old city, which we won't get into because that's not our topic today. Today our topic is the settlements. Okay. So this has been one of the... One other issue that we need to take into account, which also complicates matters somewhat. And this is the barrier. And we have a map of the barrier. Page, we do have it. Yes. Right here, the barrier. This one. So as a result of the violence of the Second Intifada, the Israeli government decided to erect this barrier, this security barrier, in order to prevent attacks, terrorist attacks inside of Israel. But there is a problem. There are issues. At the time, Tom Friedman wrote in the New York Times, if Israel was to build this barrier on the Green Line itself, nobody would have any objections. But it does not follow the path of the Green Line completely. You'll see that in some parts it does follow the Green Line. But in other parts it cuts into the West Bank and into the city of Jerusalem in order to include as many of the Jewish settlers on the western side of the security barrier. And so, as you can see in the legend to the left, about 66 settlements are west of the barrier, and about 420,000 Jews live west of the barrier. That includes the West Bank and East Jerusalem. But there are also 240,000 Palestinians who are on the western side of the barrier. So this also causes issues and problems. What's going to be the future of the barrier? By the way, the Israeli Supreme Court has been very active in monitoring and following the construction of the barrier. And in many cases, the barrier is incomplete because of objections by the Israeli courts, saying they violate property rights of Palestinians or denying Palestinians the right to work their fields, and so on and so forth. There were other considerations that were raised before the courts, and in some cases, the courts accepted those objections. And so the construction of the barrier is incomplete. The most complicated issue is in the city of Jerusalem, because the barrier does not follow the municipal borders of Jerusalem. In a few places, it cuts into the city itself. And so what you have are Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem who are also residents of the state of Israel, who are east of the barrier and cannot cross over to the west. Also, they are permanent residents of the state of Israel, and they have the right of free travel all over Israel, the right to work, but the physical barrier makes it difficult for them to cross in a timely fashion. So that's another complicated that's raised by the presence of the wall. Now, what these negotiations could say about the settlement. The hope that negotiators have been expressing from the 1990s onward is that if there is an agreement, and if it's recognized by all sides, and it's granted international legitimacy, then there will no longer be settlements. These will be the fully recognized borders. They will have international authority. And therefore, everything west or north or south of those borders will be the state of Israel, just like anywhere else. And there will be no legal questions whatsoever about those settlements. So that's part of the reason behind reaching such an agreement. We think that there is an agreement brewing in the hands of Secretary of State John Kerry. We don't know exactly what the parameters are, we can only guess because both sides, the Palestinians and the Israelis, were making statements, and based on the statements, we can assume or deduct what they were being told. So, for example, at one point, Netanyahu floated the idea that if Israel indeed accepts the logic of keeping about 4 or 5% with land swaps of territory, this would mean that about 50,000 settlers would remain in the West Bank. What to do with them? So Netanyahu floated the idea that they will remain in those settlements and become residents of the state of Palestine. So this was an idea that was brought up. It was shut down quite fiercely by the right-wing parties in his coalition. So they opposed it vehemently. He has not said that again. In fact, 2 weeks ago, he said that Israel will have to probably remove and dismantle settlements if an agreement is reached. So he's no longer, as we can tell, holding this idea. One other suggestion that has been tossed around, mainly by the right-wing parties in Israel, by Naftali Bennett and others, is to use the logic of Oslo, the A, B, and C, and that Israel should annex Territory C in the spirit of the Oslo Agreement, and arguing that this will actually not be a violation of international law because the Oslo Agreements are recognized internationally, and since they give full control to Israel, Israel will just realize its control. He also floated wrong numbers as to the Palestinians who live in Territory C, but this was another idea that was being floated around in order to legitimize, under the auspices of the international community, the Israeli settlements. I don't think anybody took those suggestions too seriously, and I don't think that they are in any way part of the John Kerry proposed plan. So this is where the situation is right now. The numbers, again, I will give you the most up-to-date numbers that we have. In the West Bank, there are about 350,000 Israeli Jewish citizens living in settlements. And in East Jerusalem, there are about 300,000 Israeli Jewish citizens. So about 650,000 all together. I would, again, tell you that a substantial number of them are ultra-Orthodox, who seem to be responding mainly to the demands of the market when it comes to housing, and don't seem, most of them, qualify that, don't seem to have any ideological attachment. Many other settlers live in those clusters that are very close to the border, and also were driven to live in the West Bank, less for ideological reasons, but more for quality of life reasons. And then we also have the ideological core of the settlers who tend geographically to live in the heart of the West Bank. One other thing that you need to take into consideration is that in 2005, Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip. At that time, there were about 7,000 Jews living in the Gaza Strip, and all the settlements were dismantled in this pullout. And by all accounts, the dismantling was very smooth, and there was very little violence or opposition by the settlers in this point. So this is also something to keep in mind, think about. So this is where things stand right now. This is, of course, just an overview. I tried to remain as faithful as possible to the numbers and facts, situation, and the way the international community and Israel views those matters. And I would like to open the floor up for questions, if possible.
And before we take any questions, so beautifully stated with such clarity over a very, very simple situation. And so before we take questions, I just want to remind us that we're really not sort of taking positions here, because I think this is an opportunity for us to be educated. And so I encourage everybody to really ask for more edifying questions that will help and promote everybody's learning and knowledge, rather than sort of try and take to make a position or take whatever you'd like. So with that, I'll let you pick on. And
Sure,
go
and
ahead.
I'll try to go.
Yeah, given that the settlers who live in the settlements that are the most likely to be dismantled, removed, are the ideological settlers, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, the terrific housing shortage inside of Israel proper, the high rents, what a political hot potato that was. Isn't this going to be a tremendous